On a freezing night in Memphis, a young mother's final drive became the start of an unthinkable tragedy. The streetlights along Sedgwick and Levi flickered against the cold, pale air. Cars passed quietly, headlights cutting through mist that hovered like breath over the asphalt. Somewhere beyond that silence, 27-year-old Danielle Hoyle sat behind the wheel of her car, her newborn daughter asleep in the back seat. She had driven out to meet someone she trusted, the father of her child. She never returned home. By the following morning, Memphis police officers would find her car abandoned near the intersection, driver's door still open, engine cooling. Inside were signs of a struggle: a shattered window, a smear of blood, a car seat twisted sideways. Her purse lay in the passenger footwell, but her infant daughter, Kennedy, was gone. To anyone else, the case might have looked like a carjacking gone wrong. To seasoned detectives, it didn't fit the pattern. The wallet was untouched. The scene looked staged. And Danielle, according to everyone who knew her, wasn't the kind of woman who disappeared without reason. Danielle Hoyle had been proud, gentle, and newly in love with motherhood. Friends remembered her posting photos of Kennedy on social media, tiny hands wrapped around her fingers. She was so excited, one friend told reporters later. She couldn't stop talking about that baby. She had given birth just 2 days earlier. 2 days. A lifetime condensed into 48 hours of joy, exhaustion, and plans for the future. Plans that included Brandon Isabelle, the man she believed she was building a family with. Brandon was 25, quiet, and by outward appearances calm. But in the weeks before Kennedy's birth, their relationship had grown strained. Arguments over money, loyalty, and commitment simmered beneath the surface. Danielle's family said she was hopeful things would improve once the baby arrived. She wanted peace, not confrontation. On February 1st, 2022, sometime after dusk, she texted him. They agreed to meet in Whitehaven, a suburban area of Memphis, to talk. Detectives would later confirm that she drove there willingly. It was supposed to be a short meeting, a conversation about their daughter. What happened next shattered 2 generations of life. Hours later, around 11 p.m., a passing driver noticed a vehicle stopped awkwardly near Levi Road. The driver's side door was open. When officers responded, they found Danielle's body nearby, shot in the head and neck. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she hadn't even seen it coming. The baby's car seat was still inside the vehicle, but the infant was missing. Detectives worked through the night. Homicide scenes in Memphis were not rare, but this one was different. A young mother, freshly postpartum, a 2-day-old baby, a gunshot execution, and a missing child. The combination ignited every alarm in the department. By dawn, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had joined the effort. The city awoke to breaking news alerts. Newborn missing after mother found dead in Whitehaven. Police scanners buzzed with updates. Patrol cars dispatched to hospitals, shelters, highways. Every minute mattered. Investigators pulled Danielle's phone records. One name appeared again and again: Brandon Isabelle. They knew him, the father. They located his address in Fraser and sent a team to make contact. Detectives found him calm, almost attached. When asked about Danielle, he said he hadn't seen her. He claimed they had argued recently and hadn't spoken that night. But the digital trail told a different story. Cell tower data showed his phone pinging near Whitehaven at the same time Danielle's had gone silent. The more they questioned him, the more his story shifted. First, he said she was supposed to drop the baby off to him. Then, he said she never showed up. Finally, when confronted with evidence that his phone had traveled toward the Mississippi River later that night, he fell silent. Detectives could feel it, the gap between truth and evasion tightening. They searched his vehicle. Inside, faint traces of blood were visible on a seatbelt buckle and floor mat. They seized clothing, shoes, and a discarded cigarette pack. Each item went to the crime lab. Meanwhile, dive teams began scanning the Mississippi's edge near Mud Island. The current was fierce, the water near freezing, but they searched anyway. For Kennedy, for proof, for closure. As the hours passed, public anxiety deepened. Local stations broadcast Danielle's photo, urging anyone with information to come forward. Family members gathered near the crime scene, crying out for answers. Danielle's mother, her voice trembling, told Fox 13 Memphis she loved that baby. She wouldn't leave her behind. Police worked in 12-hour shifts. Every theory was considered: an abduction, a revenge killing, a staged disappearance. But each breadcrumb led back to the same man. When detectives returned to interview Isabelle a second time, the air had changed. They weren't asking questions now. They were confirming suspicions. In that sterile room, under fluorescent light, the father of the missing child folded. According to the Memphis Police Department's affidavit, Isabelle admitted he had shot Danielle in the head and neck after luring her to Whitehaven. Then, he took their infant daughter, Kennedy Hoyle, drove to the riverbank, and threw her into the Mississippi River. He said he tossed a murder weapon into the same water. The room fell silent. One detective later described the moment in his report. No anger, no tears, just words. When news of the confession reached the press, Memphis stopped. People read the headlines twice, unable to believe what they were seeing. Father confesses to killing girlfriend, throwing newborn into river. Across neighborhoods, churches, and schools, disbelief turned to mourning. Candlelight vigils appeared near the crime scene. Photographs of Danielle and Kennedy printed and taped to street signs. The search for the baby continued. Even as hope dimmed, divers combed the river for days, sonar scanning every shadow beneath the surface. The Mississippi was merciless, fast, deep, cold. It gave nothing back. A week later, a small pink hat washed up near the shoreline. Investigators believed it belonged to Kennedy. It was the only trace of her ever found. In statements released to the media, authorities confirmed what everyone feared. Evidence indicates that 2-day-old Kennedy Hoyle is presumed dead. The city grieved as one. But for law enforcement, grief had to wait. They had a confession, but they still needed to prove it beyond question. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation joined with local prosecutors to reconstruct the timeline minute by minute. They traced Isabelle's phone pings from his home to the crime scene, to the river, then back again. Surveillance footage showed him stopping at a Walgreens and a Walmart, disposing of items. They found a car seat in a dumpster matching Danielle's. Each new discovery solidified the case. When police escorted Isabelle to the riverbank days later, he pointed to the spot where he said he threw the infant. "Right there," he told them, his voice reportedly barely above a whisper. But even then, he shifted details. Whether the baby was still in the seat, whether she slipped, whether he saw her float. The river stayed silent. For the investigators who had carried the case from its first call, the silence was unbearable. One detective wrote in his report, "The current carried away more than evidence. It carried away the last chance at truth." Public outrage grew. On social media, Memphis residents demanded the death penalty. Others posted tributes, tiny footprints, angel emojis, the words, "Rest in heaven, Kennedy." The prosecutors knew this case would test the system. They prepared for months. Every interview, every forensic sample, every detail of Danielle's final hours preserved. By spring 2024, State of Tennessee versus Brandon Isabelle was ready for court. In the courtroom, the air was thick, a mixture of grief, disbelief, and the quiet rage that comes when justice feels both inevitable and impossible. The man sitting at the defense table, dressed in a plain orange jumpsuit, barely lifted his head. This was Brandon Isabelle, now facing charges of first-degree murder in the deaths of Danielle Hoyle and their 2-day-old daughter, Kennedy. Around him sat families whose lives he destroyed. Danielle's mother clutching a framed photograph, tears running freely as she stared at the man she once believed her daughter loved. The prosecutor's opening statement was simple, direct, and devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust. It's about a mother who believed she was meeting the father of her child for peace, and found only death." The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, GPS data, and text messages painted the picture of premeditation. On the day of the murder, Isabelle had sent messages to Danielle urging her to meet him, promising to work things out. But he had also messaged friends earlier that day, venting about child support, saying he couldn't do this anymore. Those words would echo through the courtroom like a curse. Detectives testified how Isabelle confessed to shooting Danielle, then driving to the Mississippi River, where he threw Kennedy into the water. He admitted to tossing the gun, too, though it was never recovered. The defense had little ground to stand on. They hinted at stress, confusion, even possible mental instability. But there were no hospital records, no history of psychiatric care, no evidence of psychosis. What there was, however, was a timeline, cold and unrelenting. The prosecution reconstructed the night step by step. At 9:45 p.m., Danielle texted her mother saying she'd be home soon. At 10:10 p.m., her phone location stopped updating near Levi and Sedgwick. At 10:22 p.m., surveillance from a gas station captured Isabelle's car heading toward the Mississippi River. By 11 p.m., Danielle's car sat abandoned. The next morning, her body was discovered. The coroner's testimony was clinical, but each word was a blade. Danielle had been shot twice at close range, one bullet entering her neck, the other striking her head. Either wound would have been fatal. There were no signs of defensive injuries. She hadn't fought back because she hadn't expected to. When they brought up the baby's death, the courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused before allowing the prosecutor to continue. The medical examiner explained that while Kennedy's body was never recovered, forensic evidence from the car seat, clothing fibers, and DNA traces confirmed she had been with Danielle that night. The Mississippi's temperature and current speed made survival impossible. The court accepted the presumption of death and charged Isabelle accordingly. In one of the most haunting moments of the trial, the prosecution played the recorded interview of Isabelle's confession. His voice filled the room. "I shot her. Then I drove to the bridge. I threw the baby in. I didn't want to deal with it no more." Gasps broke through the silence. Danielle's mother sobbed uncontrollably. One juror put her hand over her mouth. There are crimes that defy comprehension, acts so unnatural that no motive can ever truly explain them. This was one of them. Investigators testified that Isabelle had been frustrated with his financial situation, unwilling to accept the responsibility of fatherhood, and resentful of the attention Danielle gave their newborn. But beyond the paperwork and witness statements, what stood out was a complete absence of remorse. When asked by police why he did it, Isabelle reportedly said, "I just snapped." But snapping implies emotion, a moment of chaos. This was planned. He had lured her out. He had brought a gun. He had driven to a river he knew well. The prosecution emphasized this repeatedly, the deliberate nature of his choices. "He didn't snap," the district attorney said, pointing directly at Isabelle. He decided. During the trial, Danielle's family took the stand. Her mother described the last time she saw her daughter, exhausted but radiant, holding baby Kennedy in the hospital. "She was so proud," she said softly. She kept saying, "Look at her, Mama. She's perfect." That same perfection, that innocence, had been destroyed within days. The defense attempted to shift tone, arguing that Isabelle's confession was coerced, that detectives had pressured him after hours of questioning. But the video footage told another story. He was calm. He signed each page of the statement voluntarily. He even detailed where he threw the weapon. At one point, prosecutors brought up the pink hat, the tiny scrap of fabric found along the Mississippi's edge. An officer held it up in a clear plastic bag. The courtroom fell still. "This," the prosecutor said, "is all that was left of Kennedy Hoyle." Even hardened officers in the gallery wiped tears. In closing arguments, the state called the case a modern tragedy born of cowardice. The prosecutor's voice trembled slightly as he finished. Danielle Hoyle loved that man enough to meet him in the dark. She trusted him with her life and her child's. And he repaid that trust with bullets and silence. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about confusion. It's about choice. When it came time for deliberation, the jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Danielle Hoyle. First-degree murder of infant Kennedy Hoyle. Tampering with evidence. Abuse of a corpse. The verdict came down heavy, final, absolute. Danielle's mother broke down sobbing as the words were read. Isabelle sat motionless, eyes lowered, as though the weight of his own crime had yet to reach him. But even after conviction, one question lingered. Why? Why kill the mother of your child? Why kill a newborn? Why destroy everything in a single night? Psychologists interviewed by media outlets called it filicide born of narcissism, a form of control where the perpetrator would rather destroy than lose. Others saw it as cold, calculated elimination of responsibility. But to Danielle's family, explanations didn't matter. The only truth that mattered was the one they would carry forever. Danielle and Kennedy were gone. After the trial, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Danielle's mother approached the podium, hands shaking. "You took my baby and my grandbaby," she said. "You threw them away like they were nothing. But they were everything. And no sentence will ever be enough." The courtroom was silent, except for her sobs echoing against the walls. Isabelle was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The death penalty had been considered, but Danielle's family chose not to pursue it. "We want him to live with what he did," her mother told reporters, "every single day." As he was led from the courtroom, shackled and expressionless, no one looked away. Cameras captured the moment, the face of a man who had extinguished 2 lives that should have been sacred. In the weeks that followed, the case haunted Memphis. Churches held vigils. Strangers left stuffed animals along the Mississippi's edge. A mural appeared downtown, Danielle holding her baby, surrounded by painted angel wings. Beneath it, someone wrote in white paint, "2 days old, forever loved." For detectives, the case closed, but the river never released its grip on them. Some returned on their days off, standing by the water, staring out across the current that had swallowed Kennedy. "We looked for her every day we could," one officer later told a local station. "Every single day. We never stopped." The Mississippi flowed on, unbothered, unbroken, carrying its secrets beneath the surface. In the months after the verdict, the city of Memphis carried a shadow. The faces of Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle lingered on murals, in news footage, and in the soft, trembling voices of family members still trying to understand the impossible. Reporters stopped by the Hoyle home for follow-ups. They found Danielle's mother sitting on the porch, surrounded by framed photos of her daughter and granddaughter. She kept Kennedy's baby blanket folded neatly on her lap, the last tangible piece of her family she could still hold. "I can't sleep," she told one interviewer quietly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. And I think about that baby out there in the cold water." The story had shaken Memphis not only because of its brutality, but because of how ordinary it began. It wasn't a random crime. It wasn't a stranger. It was a domestic execution, the ultimate betrayal, carried out by someone who was supposed to love them. Within the Memphis Police Department, the case left deep scars. Detective Michael Evans, one of the lead investigators, spoke publicly months later. His words carried the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much. "I've seen a lot of death in this job," he said, "but this one hurt the soul. A newborn, a mother who trusted. You can't unsee that." For the officers who dove into the Mississippi, searching in cold, dark water for a 2-day-old baby, the grief came later, when the adrenaline faded. Many struggled with guilt, replaying every sonar scan, every search grid, wondering if they had missed something. But the truth was, the river doesn't give back what it takes. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation quietly closed the physical search after 10 days. Still, every year since, on February 1st, some of the same officers returned to the bank and placed flowers at the spot Isabelle pointed to, a silent memorial to a child they never found. Psychological experts later dissected the case, trying to make sense of what had driven Brandon Isabelle to destroy his own blood. One forensic psychologist described it as a convergence of ego, fear, and control. In his mind, she said, Danielle and Kennedy represented a responsibility he didn't want to carry, so he eliminated them. He didn't see them as people anymore. He saw them as problems. It's a chilling insight that sometimes murder isn't born of rage, but of apathy. Records show that Isabelle had no history of mental illness, no criminal record for violence, and no clear trigger for what he did. He was simply unwilling to face the reality of being a father. To him, fatherhood meant obligation, and obligation meant confinement. He chose freedom, in the most horrific way imaginable. The court-appointed psychiatrist described his demeanor during evaluation as flat, detached, and devoid of empathy. Isabelle reportedly expressed no emotion when shown photographs of Danielle or Kennedy. When asked if he regretted what he had done, he said, "It don't matter now." That statement appeared in the final sentencing report. 6 words that stripped away any illusion of remorse. Outside of the courtroom, though, the case inspired something unexpected, a wave of advocacy. Women's rights groups and domestic violence organizations across Tennessee began using Danielle's story as a warning. Not about strangers lurking in the dark, but about the danger that can exist inside relationships that appear safe. The Justice for Danielle and Kennedy initiative was founded in early 2023, urging better protection for women leaving abusive or manipulative relationships and faster response times when young mothers are reported missing. They held annual candlelight vigils along the riverbank, reading aloud the names of women and children lost to domestic homicide. At one such vigil, Reverend Thomas Green spoke to a crowd of hundreds. Danielle trusted love, he said, and love betrayed her. But from her story, we will build protection, not just memory. The initiative later worked with local lawmakers to introduce the Danielle's Law Act, a proposal that would expand background checks and counseling programs for high-risk domestic cases involving newborns. The bill was still under review, but for Danielle's family, the fight became a way to give her life meaning beyond its brutal end. Meanwhile, the prison where Isabelle was housed reported that he remained isolated, serving a life sentence without parole in a maximum security facility. Fellow inmates refused to interact with him, not out of fear, but out of disgust. Child killers, even in prison, occupy the lowest rung of humanity. Guard described him as quiet, cold, and indifferent. He rarely spoke, never asked for visitors, and didn't participate in counseling programs. For Danielle's family, that silence was its own kind of punishment. They visited the river often, sometimes bringing balloons, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing at all, just their grief. On Kennedy's birthday each year, her grandmother released a single white balloon into the sky and whispered, "We love you, baby girl." The image of that lone balloon floating over the river became symbolic, a fragile act of defiance against the darkness that took them. By early 2025, the story had faded from headlines, but not from memory. Local journalists revisited the case, calling it one of the most senseless crimes in Tennessee's modern history. They noted how the tragedy had redefined how Memphis viewed domestic violence, not as private disputes, but as potential preludes to horror. Detective Evans, now retired, gave one final interview about the case. He stared out across the river as he spoke, voice low, steady. "When I think about Danielle," he said, "I think about trust. She just wanted her daughter to know her father. That's all. But sometimes the person you trust most is the one who destroys everything." He paused, glancing toward the water. "We never found Kennedy, but I like to believe she's somewhere peaceful, far from all this." As he walked away, the camera lingered on the current, endless, shifting, unknowable. The Mississippi had carried both evidence and innocence away, but what it left behind was a city forever marked by loss. In a world flooded with breaking news and fleeting stories, some tragedies linger because they reveal the worst kind of truth, that evil doesn't always arrive with warning. Sometimes it knocks softly, sometimes it smiles, and sometimes it wears the face of someone who says, "I love you." The story of Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle is not one that fades quietly into history. It lingers in the hearts of those who love them, in the silence of a river that never gave up its dead, and in the conscience of a city forced to confront the darkest corners of human nature. In the months after the case closed, the sidewalk along Levi Road became a place of pilgrimage. Passers-by left roses, pacifiers, handwritten notes, and tiny baby shoes. Children asked their parents why there were so many flowers near the street. Parents struggled for words. Some simply said, because someone didn't protect them. At night, when the street was empty and the cold air carried a faint hum of traffic from Highway 51, candles flickered in front of a wooden cross marked with 2 names. Danielle Hoyle, 1994 to 2022. Kennedy Hoyle, 2022 to 2022. There were no birthdays, no milestones, no future photographs to frame. only a story that began and ended in the same breath. For Danielle's family, time didn't heal. It simply reshaped the pain into something quieter, heavier. Her mother still visited the site every February 1st, bringing fresh flowers and whispering to her daughter, "I'm still here, baby. I'm still looking after her." The Memphis community never forgot. Each year, the city held a remembrance walk, hundreds of people moving in silence, carrying candles along the Mississippi. No speeches, no music, just the sound of water and footsteps. For every light that went out, another was lit, a small rebellion against the darkness that had taken them. And yet, amid the sorrow, something else grew: awareness. Shelter saw an increase in women seeking help before things escalated. Churches started support programs for young mothers. Police units began working more closely with domestic violence counselors, using Danielle's case as a warning that silence kills. Her story saved others, even in death. In interviews, detectives admitted they still struggle with the case, especially the divers who had searched the river. One diver described how the image of the baby's pink hat haunted him. "I still see it sometimes," he said softly. "Just that little hat floating by. That's when it hit me. We weren't looking for evidence anymore. We were looking for goodbye." The Mississippi River is a force older than memory, a current that swallows lives and secrets alike. Somewhere within its depths, the smallest of souls was taken, but the ripples she left behind reached farther than anyone could have imagined. Years later, a plaque was placed near the site of Danielle's death. It reads, "In loving memory of Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle, may your light forever remind us that love without protection is not love at all." Visitors stopped to read it, some praying, others just standing in silence. The inscription faces the river, the same direction Danielle was last seen driving that night. And so, this story ends where it began: a young mother, her newborn daughter, and a road that led to heartbreak. But within that heartbreak lies something enduring, the reminder that trust, when betrayed, can destroy lives, yet remembrance can rebuild meaning from what was lost. Danielle's life was brief, but her love was vast. Kennedy's life was shorter still, but her memory stretches farther than the Mississippi itself. Together, they became a symbol of innocent silence, but not forgotten. In the quiet that follows tragedy, Memphis learned that true justice is not found in a sentence or a cell or a courtroom verdict. It's found in the promise that no one else will suffer in silence, that every mother, every child, every cry for help will be heard before it's too late. And as the river continues its endless flow beneath the Tennessee sky, their names remain, whispered in prayers, carried on candlelight, and etched forever into the conscience of a city that vowed never to forget, because some stories do not end. They echo. They remind us that behind every headline is a heartbeat, behind every crime scene is a family, and behind every tragedy is a lesson written in loss. This one, the story of Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle, is not just a crime. It's a reminder how fragile trust can be, and how even in the darkest currents, love still refuses to sink. May Danielle Hoyle and her daughter, Kennedy, rest in peace.